Hi everyone, welcome to Javaras. So let's continue our discussion of Spring IOC container. So you might have encountered a situation where you need multiple beans for different environments. So for example, for development environment, you need different bean, and for production environment, you need different bean. And there can be many cases where you need different beans, or you need to read the properties or read some values from properties file or from system environment variables. So we are going to look at all these things in this video. So basically we are going to look at environment, which contains profiles and properties. So environment is an abstraction, and we use profiles and properties in order to configure the environment, and based on the environment we can choose specific bean or specific properties. So basically there are two annotation, profile annotation and property source annotation, which we will look in this video. So first let's see what is an environment. So it's an interface, and this is integrated in Spring ISO container, so we don't need to use any additional library or any additional dependency to use it. And there are two key aspects in environment, which is profiles and properties. So let's see what is profiles. So profile is a logical group of bean definitions, and profile has a name. So you can define that for this profile these beans are available to the Spring context, and for another profile another set of beans are available. Environment determines which profile is currently active, so there can be multiple profiles active at the same time, and which profile should be active by default. So if we don't specify any active profile, then which profile should be active by default. Now let's say we have different bean for different environment. Let's say for development environment we have dev data config, which we want to use, and for production environment we have prod data config, which we want to use. And both of these config files have the data source bean, so the type of bean is same. But while creating the data source bean, we are providing different database URL, different username and different password. So you can see for the development purpose we use simple username, password and URL, but for the production we use complicated username and password, and the URL of the data source is also different. So how do we achieve this? I already created this project here. So this is the pom.xml file. So Java version we are using 17, and I already included Spring context dependency. Now we have main.java. This is the main method, so which has nothing for now. Then we have data source. Data source class inside DB package. So we want to create different beans of data source for different environments. So it takes database URL, username and password. Now we have dev data config, which configs the data source for development environment. So this is the dev data config. It's annotated with configuration annotation, and it is creating a data source with this URL, username and password. And this is annotated with bean. So this bean will be registered in Spring IOC container. Then we have prod data config, which configures the data source for production environment, same as dev data config, but here the database URL, username and password is different. Then we have project config, which imports both of these dev data config and prod data config class, because we cannot do that in development environment import dev data config, and in production environment import prod data config. We cannot do that. So because our source code should be same in development environment or in product environment. Now let's create an application context. New annotation config application context and give project config.class. And let's print out bean of type data source. And let's run it. Now you can see we are getting the data source for this production, because we have same type of bean, so bean with the same name in two different classes, two different configuration classes, and in that case, the second one, which is the pro data config class, will override the first one. So let's say if we have dev data after pro data config. So after pro data config, we have dev data config, and if we run it again, then you can see we are getting the data source for from pro data config. But this is not what we want, because now in both environments, in dev environment and in product environment, we will have the same bean, but we want to have different beans in different environments. So for that, we can use at the rate profile annotation. So if we annotate dev data config with development environment, that means if the development profile is active, then this bean will be available to the Spring IOC container. Otherwise, it will not be available to the container. So go to dev data config and we'll use profile, let's say development, and pro data config. I will use red profile production. Now this bean will be available in production profile, and this bean will be available when the development profile is active. Now let's run it. If we run it, we are getting exception no qualifying bean of type db data source available, because neither development nor production profile is active, and we can see that. So we can print out which bean is currently active. So we can get the environment from context.get environment.get active profiles. So so this will give us list of active profiles, and we can print it. So let's rerun it. Now we can see no profile is active. So no profile is active, that means development is profile is not active. So this bean will not be available to the Spring IC container, and production bean is not active, so this bean will not be available to the Spring IC container. So now the question is how to activate the profile. So we can activate the profile using programmatically or declaratively. So let's first look at programmatically. So to activate a profile using programmatically, uh, before registering project config.class or any config class, we need to set the active profile. So you can see first we create annotation config application context with default constructor, then we get environment from the context and we set the active profile. You can set anything, development, production, anything, and then we register the configuration classes, and then we refresh the context. So project config.class, we will remove it from the constructor argument, and we will say context dot. So this should not be application context, this will be annotation config application context. So context dot register project config dot class context dot refresh. But before registering any configuration classes, we need to set the active profile on environment. So context dot get environment dot set active profiles. So you can set multiple active profiles. So let's just set development. So the development profile will be active, and if we run it again, now you can see active profile is development, and this is the data source for development. Now you can set multiple profiles. So let's set production as well, and let's see what happens. Now in this case, both profiles are active, but we are getting the dev data configs bean because we have specified that later while importing, and it will override the bean of pro data config. So that's how we activate a profile. So let's activate production, and in this case this is coming from the production. So that's how we activate a profile. But again, we cannot use this in real life because we cannot set profile using programmatically. We should not, because otherwise if we deploy it, then again we need to set the active profile to production, and when we work in development, then we need to set the active profile to development. So we can do that, but that's not the ideal scenario. So how do we do that? We will look at that later. Now you can use profile as meta annotation as well. Let's say we don't want to use at profile production at many places because it's error prone, so we can misspell production easily. In that case, you can create your own annotation called production, and you can use that. So for that, we just create a production annotation and annotate that with at profile production. And now instead of at profile production, we can use at production. So let's see that quickly. So let's create a new Java class inside profiles dot production, and instead of class it will be in annotation, so at interface. So we need to set target retention. So these two are necessary for annotation target. So let's just set type, and let's say retention and runtime. Now we need to use profile and production. So that means this, whenever we use at the rate production, that will be similar to at the rate profile production. So instead of in pro data config, instead of pro at profile production, we can just use at the rate production, and if we refresh it, it will work as before. Okay. Now we can use profile at method level as well. So uh, let's say we don't have two different configuration for two different environments. In the same configuration file, we can define uh, two different beans, and we use profile on method level. So you can see we have at profile development. So this method will be, so the bean returned with from this method will be available only in case of development profile is active, and the second method will be available if production profile is active. So let's do that. So from the project config, I will remove the import statement, and from the dev data config, I will copy it and I will paste it here. From the pro data config, I will copy it and I will paste it in project config. Now, since there cannot be two methods with the same name, so let's let's use at bean data source. So bean, the name of the bean is data source. So let's say rename it to dev data source and rename it to prod data source. But the name of the bean should be data source only. So bean data source. And now let's specify profile development, and here as well the name of the bean will be data source only, and we can use at the rate production. But we will get this error that production is not applicable to methods, because here we have only specified element type dot type. That means it will be only available for classes, So we can use method. So now we can use this annotation on method as well, and that's what we are doing here. Okay. Yep. So that being said, if we refresh it, so it is working fine. There's active profile is production, and we are getting the data source related to the production. Now that's how we use profile at method level as well. Now let's look at how to activate profiles declaratively. So in order to do that, we need to set the value of spring.profiles.active property. How do we do that? We can use system environment variables, or we can use JVM system properties. So system environment variables means in our operating system there will be an environment variable with the name is spring.profiles.active, and its value will be the value of active profile. So in your production environment, you may have one system environment variable with the spring.profiles.active key, and value can be production. So in that case, whenever you run this application, the active profile will be production. And in your local, in while developing, you can set value of spring.profiles.active system variable to development. And you can use JVM system properties as well. So while running the application, you can set the JVM system property. So like here we are using -d. This is to specify that this is a JVM system property, and then the property name which is spring.profiles.active, and you can use multiple profiles. So we are using two profiles here, profile 1 and profile 2. So these two profiles will be active. So let's do that here. So let's say here we don't want to mm, activate a profile using Java code, but then we will get this error. So what we can do is we can go here and modify run configuration, modify option, add JVM option, VM options. So here the we use D. This is to specify that this is JVM property. Then spring dot profiles dot active equal to, let's say, development. So spring dot profiles dot active equal to development. Okay, let's apply. Let's rerun it. Now you can see active profile is development, and data source is also related to the development environment. Now if we modify them, and instead of development, let's say production, and click on apply. Okay, now you can see the active profile is production, and the data source is also specific to the production. Now let's look at default profile. So if we don't activate any profile, the default profile is activated by default, and its name is default. If any other profile is enabled, the default does not apply. And so we can change the name of the default, but the name of default profile is default. So let's see that. So let's go to modifier and configuration and remove this JVM option, apply. And if we run it, we will get that error because no profile is active. Now what we want that if no profile is active, then okay, then we want this. Sorry, we want to register this bin if no profile is active. Then you can use default here. That means this bin will be available for development profile and for default profile. So if we run it again, so you can see no profile is active. That means default profile will be active. But you can see the data source related to the development. Now what we want is, let's say we have many beans in our application, and the beans are specific to development and production. So what we want is, if no beans is no environment, or sorry, no profile is active, then activate the default development profile, because we don't want to go at go every place and use these two profiles like development and profile. So what we can do is, let's remove default from here, go to main class, and here instead of set active profiles, let's set default profiles. And we can add more than one here, but I will add only one, development. So that means if no profile is active, activate the development profile. We run it. Now you can see still no profile is active, but the development profile or all the beans which has development profile set will be active or will be available to the Spring IC container. So that's how we specify the default profile. So we can specify default profile using spring.profiles.default as well. So same as we have specified active profile, in the same way we can specify the default profile as well. Now let's look at property source abstraction. So let's say we want to get some property from the environment. So for that we can first get the environment from application context and then get the property from environment. Okay. So let's say we are accessing the property which is a name prop, and we have a JVM property prop with value my value. So this my value will be returned from environment.get property prop. So this is JVM system property. So let's look at that. So what we can do is, yeah, let's print out context.get environment.get property. Let's say prop. We run it. You can see the value is null because this is not available. What we can do is, uh, let's say Java home, and if we run it again, now you can see this is being printed because this is the actual value of Java home variable in the system environment. So if I open terminal and I say echo Java home, then this is the value of this property. So let's say echo user. So Himanshu is the value of property user in the system environment. So we can use that as well. And if we run it, you can see Himanshu being printed here. So that means get property will get the property from environment variables as well. Now let's get the property from JVM option. So if I go here, modifier and configuration, and JVM options, for that we need hyphen, then capital D, then the property name. So let's say property name is prop, and its value is, let's say, my value, and let's say the property name is user, and its value is my user. Click on apply. Okay. Now we are printing the value of user, as well as we will print the value of prop, and run it again. So now you can see the value of user is my user because we have explicitly provided that. So whatever we specify in JVM properties, that will override whatever is available in the system environment variables, because in the system environment value of user is Himanshu, but in the JVM options the value of user property is my user, and value of prop is my value. So that's how we specify the properties. Okay. So now let's look at some example which is more or similar to real world coding. So what we can do is, so instead of hard coding the database URL, username and password, we can use @value annotation. And in that way we can specify the name of the properties. So for database URL, the name of property is db.url. For username, the name of property is db.user.name. And for password, the value of the name of property is db.user.password. Now Spring IOC container will try to look for values of these properties. So it will try to look in the system environment variables and in the JVM properties. But we can also specify any file where this should look for the values of these properties. And for that we use property source annotation. And here we can specify multiple files where we want IOC container to look for the values or to resolve the values of these properties. So in this case we are specifying db config.properties file. So let's see that. Okay, so I will go to project config, and here let's specify private string database URL, private string username and private string password. Now for this we'll use value, and it will be db.url. For the second property as well, I will use value annotation, and the name of the property will be db.username. And for the third variable, which is password as well, the name of the property will be db.password. Okay. Now let's uh, tell the IOC container to look in the sum file to resolve these values. So I will say @property source, and here we can specify multiple files. But before that, let's create a file. Inside resources, create a new directory called db, which will have all the db configuration, and inside it create a file called config.properties. So in project config, here we can use class path, it will be string, then db config.properties. Now inside config.properties we can specify these three values. So let's say db.url equal to, and let's say uh, we use this value, which is JDBC MySQL say 127.0.0.1, and let's port is 2120, and the database name is, let's say, books, and db dot username equal to user321, db dot password equal to 4321 pws. Now let's rerun the application. Now in this case, since no profile is active and development is the default profile, so we will see the development bean only. So for that, let's configure the VM option. So main.java, go to modifier and configuration. So here we have d spring dot profiles dot active equal to production ctl pi on production. Supply. Okay, rerun it. Now we can see production is active, and we are still getting the um, earlier being here, because yeah, I think we are hard coding it, so we are not using these variables. We need to use these variables: database URL, and this will be username, and this will be password. We rerun it. Now we can see the database URL. We are getting whatever we have defined in the application, or sorry, config.properties file, username and password, all these three things. So what we can do is, now instead of storing, or we should not ideally store sensitive information in properties file. So let's say we don't want to store the password here, and if we run it, then the password will be this $db password. So what we can do is, let's say we don't want to store the username as well. Yeah, let's say db name, the URL is fine to store here, because without username and password, yeah, this cannot be compromised. So if we rerun it, you can see username is the literally string whatever we have defined inside at the value. So for that, what we can do is, let's say if not db.username property is specified, in that case use dev as username and pass as password. Or sorry, no, we don't do that. We use colon here. So colon and colon. Okay. So, run it again, and you can see username is dev and password is pws pass. So, and when we deploy this application to production, at that case, while running the application, we can specify JVM arguments, or we can specify system environment variables. So let's see how to do that. So go here, modify run configuration. So we are modifying the run configuration here in the IDE, but actually you can in the production you use Java command. So there also we can use these same parameters. So minus d db dot username equal to, let's say, user 12321, and db, sorry, db dot password equal to pass321 at the rate 12313 pass, completed password. Let's apply OK and rerun it. Now still the username is dev and password is paws. Something wrong is going on. Okay, because there is space in property name, there should not be any space. Run it. Yeah. Now you can see username is user12321 and password is this one. So let's do one thing here. In the config.properties, let's specify the username as well. Let's say usr. Now what do you think? Which username will be considered, this username or the username which is being specified from in JVM arguments? And the answer is whatever we are specifying in JVM arguments, that is of high priority. We run it. The username is this one, because what do we do is, we want to have great control when we deploy the application, and when we deploy the application we don't have control on the source code. We only have the control on system environment variables, and we have more control on JVM arguments. So the JVM arguments has the highest priority, and if some property is not found in JVM arguments, then we look in system environment variables. If nothing is found there, then we look in properties file. If nothing is found there, then the default value is used. If no default value is found, then the literal string is used. If that is also not provided, then the null value is used. So that's how property resolution works. So we have seen that if we provide JVM arguments, then the arguments which are defined in the properties file will be overridden. So that's it for this video. I hope you like the video. Thank you for watching. We will meet in the next video. Until then, keep learning. Bye.